Joel, how many are you expecting today, Joel?
We're missing 4 people.
You got 12 already.
Adam, Adam, do you hear us? Adam is our guide. Can you, oh, there you are.
There he is.
We see that you.
Well, good afternoon. I am just wondering whether if this experience is being recorded or not.
Yes, we have a few people who couldn't make it who wants.
Ah, okay. Well, this is something that we were supposed to be discussed before. But okay. Not the happiest, to be honest, that the tour is being recorded. Well, I'm here in Budapest. My name is Adam, and I am going to be your local guide in the historical Jewish quarter. And I guess since we have another 2 minutes to go, we'll wait and then off we go. So until that time, feel free to, fire up questions.
What time is it? What time is it right now?
The local time in Budapest is 5 p.m. Central European Summer Time. And the local temperature is down to like 10 degrees Celsius, which I am not able to convert into Fahrenheit because I only brought my talkative self. I didn't bring my calculative self to the tour. And yeah, well, right now I am in the heart of Budapest. It's rush hour. So there will be lots of people on the streets and there will be lots of crazy car drivers on the streets as well. And actually the idea is that in the next roughly 1 hour, we will cover the so-called Golden Triangle of the historical Jewish quarter of Pest, which is neither historical nor Jewish. You may raise your eyebrows. Is like, how the heck do we call it like that? Well, I will uncover it obviously as soon as it's 5 p.m. But I guess it's 5 p.m. So
Yeah, we could, Adam, I'm gonna mute everybody if you want, just so that we don't have any background. You could unmute yourself. Everybody's muted. You can
Okay.
unmute yourself, Adam.
Okay, so once again, I am muted myself. So welcome. My name is Adam. And if you haven't heard it before, then I'm a professional licensed guide of Hungary. I do have special licenses issued by the Dohányi Street Synagogue, so I can guide inside of the Rumbach and the Dohányi Street Synagogue as well. And since 2020, I've been offering these live virtual experiences as well. So right now I am sitting in the heart of Budapest on the edge of the so-called historical Jewish quarter. And during the tour, the idea is that we will cover the so-called Golden Triangle of the Jewish quarter. I will first show you the Rumbach Street Synagogue, then we will walk to the Kazinczy Street Synagogue, also known as the Orthodox Synagogue of Budapest. And the cream or the cherry on the cake will be to see the Dohányi Street Synagogue as well. All synagogues will be shown from the outside. And before we continue with the tour, I would like to ask you to actually mute your microphones, because I can hear myself echoing in one of your devices.
Waiting room.
But whenever you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself. feel free to drop your questions in the comment section, because it's always better to talk about those things that you are interested in instead of those things that I think is interesting, because I only have the local point of view. I don't have your point of view from Chicago, by the way, lovely city. So be proud of your hometown. Well, a little briefing about where we actually are. And I guess you've just seen my face for long enough to remember it. Well, we are in the city center. And as you can see on your image, well, we Hungarians, we are very pragmatic when it comes to spending or wasting energy. You can still see the Christmas decorations while we've set up already the spring market or the Easter market, which will be on the 14th, 15th, and 16th of April, as far as I remember. But as I've mentioned, I didn't bring my numeric skills with me. And well, right next to these benches and seating arrangements, you can see a makeshift wall with Budapest Love You sign. We try to turn the city as colorful as possible. This makeshift wall built of cobblestones actually represents the formal walls of Pest. We are on the Pest side of the Hungarian capital city. Right across from the river Danube, we have Buda. And well, we also have some canines, because well, this is one of the few green areas of downtown which has very high density. And if you miss all the green, then you're absolutely right. Budapest is not necessarily known as the city of common sense. That will also apply for most of the stories of the coming tour. So the makeshift wall that I've mentioned already probably 2 times shows you the formal line of the city walls. So right next to us, on the other side of the wall, we have the old town of Pest. The old town of Pest from the late 1600s till the late 1700s, till 1783, when the extension of the patent of tolerance was introduced, had to be all Roman Catholic. Only Roman Catholic churches were allowed to be built there. Only Roman Catholics were allowed to run businesses there. And only Roman Catholics were allowed to live there. So everyone who wanted to provide a rivalry to Roman Catholic shopkeepers tend to settle down as close as possible to the old town of Pest. And this is why a neighborhood right across the little ring road that we will go through, we will cross very soon. So where we can see this yellow building up till the next corner. Well, those settled who wanted to provide, as I mentioned, the rivalry to the Roman Catholic shopkeepers. So till that very building, this is how wide or how narrow, depending whether if the glass is half full or half empty, is the so-called historical Jewish quarter. And as I mentioned, that the historical Jewish quarter is neither historical nor Jewish. The reason why the historical Jewish quarter shall not be called historical is that the first Jewish quarter of the Hungarian capital city was on the right bank of the Danube, on the Buda side. And during the late 1700s, Jewish merchants started to relocate to this neighborhood across the street because they wanted to provide a rivalry for the Roman Catholic shopkeepers, but not just Jewish merchants, but also Serbian and Greek Orthodox merchants, and even Lutherans and Calvinists could only settle down in that neighborhood. This would be the Lutheran Church of downtown, which was also built outside of the formal walls of Pest. So that's the line of the formal walls, and that would be the Lutheran Church. So the neighborhood that we'll discover today was always a mixed neighborhood. However, during the late 1800s, early 1900s, the neighborhood was dominated by the Jewish community. And as I've mentioned, the first Jewish communities were on the Buda side and not on the Pest side. One reason for the communities to relocate to Pest was to provide rivalry, as I mentioned. The other reason was that the rabbi of Obuda, the north part of Buda, was very conservative, and a great part of the Obuda Jewish community had troubles digesting the rabbi's views, and their only chance to get rid of the rabbi was to start a new community on the Pest side of the Hungarian capital city. So the first couple of chapters of the Jewish legacy of the Hungarian capital city of Budapest were on the Buda side between the 1200s and the 1700s. Up until this point, do you have any questions that I can answer? It's nice to run a tour on Zoom so I can see your faces, which is a lovely experience for me. Most of my virtual tours are running in front of switched off cameras, so I can see the excitement in your eyes, which is fantastic. So thank you very much for staring at your screens. So right now, we are waiting for the green light to cross to the historical Jewish quarter. Well, in Budapest, we always have to wait for the green light. Otherwise, car drivers will consider us as a moving target for 2 points. The significance of this exposed red brick building is that it was built in 1937. The previous building that stood there was built during the late 1700s, and it was called the Orci houses. And that was the first building on the Pest side where Jewish people, Jewish families settled. First, they only rented beds, then rooms, and then the entire formal Orci houses, which actually started at the yellow building. The yellow building that once accommodated the Zetchens, the Jewish marriage makers, and their cafe, which was the Herzl Cafe. The name Herzl will pop up during this tour later on as well. So anyways, the Orci houses started on this corner and continued till you can see exposed red bricks. In the meantime, a streetcar will pass by, so, don't be scared. So the Orci houses lasted till this point. The Orci houses featured 4 courtyards in total. The 4 courtyards being populated by Jewish families, all of those. And the courtyards being populated with with families with different social status. So there was one courtyard for the wealthy or wealthier families. There was one courtyard for the blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, and for the least privileged families. It is said that the Orci houses that featured 42 shops on the first floor, facing the formal walls, facing the Roman Catholic area, featured everything that a Jewish family would need during their entire life. It featured the Shakta, it featured Talmud Torah, kindergartens, schools, kosher shops, and so on and so forth. So that was the first building where Jewish families popped up on the Pest side, and decades later, the building was known as a single-handed Jewish building. So single-handed that on the first floor, a few meters away from where we are standing, a kosher Grand Cafe as well was to be found. And I really hope that the audio quality is still good. Actually, a huge storm is approaching Budapest, bringing Sahara sand that may affect the audio quality, but should that happen, kindly let me know and I will figure out something. Anyways,
Adam, the picture and sound by us is very good.
is good.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Fantastic. Thank you for the feedback. The Orci houses also featured warehouses, so storage facilities inside, and the building featured a massive basement as well, where hundreds of thousands of liters of wine could be stored. Trading with wine was, traditionally speaking, a business, a trade of Jewish families. Wherever in Hungary we produced wine, trading was done by Jewish families. It is also important to know that the main street that we've just crossed was also the home of the quarter-year markets. The quarter-year markets were not just a single day markets, they were weeks long. And merchants obviously had to bring their goods to the market beforehand. So basically for 1 month, well, 3 times 1 month, this area was the busiest area of Budapest. And that's when the cafes of this neighborhood came into the picture, the Jewish cafes and the other grand cafes of the city, which provided a safe place to exchange news, a safe place to draft contracts, a safe place to gather all the information, the available information, and so on and so forth. The Orci houses also featured synagogues, multiple synagogues. And the Orci houses was the one where the otherwise united Jewish community of Pest started to, well, break into different congregations. But before we can talk about different congregations and how they and why and when they split, we should talk about how we should talk about the first step of the Jewish assimilation and integration. As you can see, this neighborhood has very high density, hardly no green is to be found here. The nickname actually of this neighborhood is the party neighborhood of Europe. Pre-COVID times, within 10 blocks radius, there were 354 places with liquor licenses. So basically half of continental Europe partied here every single day. And because it was such an important venue of partying and eating out and so on and so forth, the rental prices and the property prices were sky high. And that actually helped a lot for the Jewish communities to run their institutions, assisted living facilities, hospitals, ritual bathhouses, and so on and so forth. The reason why this neighborhood has such a high density goes back to 1838. In 1838, actually, a flood happened on the 15th of March. And within a few days, 2/3 of the buildings on the Pest side were washed away. Obviously, the state, the Habsburg Empire, didn't have the money to rebuild the entire city from scratches, from mud and rubble. So the idea was to find a way to channel in as many people's money, financial resources as possible. Until 1838, Jewish people were not allowed to own properties in Hungary. They were only allowed to rent properties. And in the meantime, if you look at the screen carefully, the first synagogue of our 3 main protagonists pop up in the distance. So in 1838, the idea of the Habsburg Empire was to allow Jewish families as well, to allow Jewish people's money as well to be invested into real estate. And the Rumbach Street Synagogue that we have ahead of us is the first synagogue in Budapest that was built on Jewish property. Actually, the property was purchased in 1865. The synagogue itself was built in 1872, and it was designed by Otto Wagner. Otto Wagner, if you happen to been to Vienna, how Vienna looks like today is basically Otto Wagner's idea. He's a renowned architect in Central Europe, and he was so significant in Vienna's architecture, like Chicago's architecture is in terms of the United States' architecture. It was Otto Wagner's very first blueprint that he could sign himself. And his design was so unique. Actually, the synagogue from the inside has a octagonal shape. So his design is so unique that there were no Hungarian architects who could double check his calculations, his blueprints. So it was Otto Wagner who had to vouch himself that at least for 150 years, his synagogue will stand on Rumbach Street, which was named after a medical doctor with German heritage who was providing free medical care for those in need and free medical care also for military officers. And to make sure that his memory will not fade away, the street was named after this medical doctor. And in Budapest, all synagogues are named after the street they are located in. So we talked about the 1838 flood that allowed Jewish investors to put their money into real estate. And the next big step in terms of integration and assimilation was the 1848-1849 uprising. Hungarians stood up against the Habsburg rule, and the 1848-49 uprising, the newly born Hungarian army was largely sponsored by Jewish families. Either weapons being manufactured by Jewish families or money was donated to the newly founded Hungarian army. And this was something that the Christian-dominated Hungarian society did not forget, the Jewish families. And when the new state was born in 1867, when the Austro-Hungarian monarchy was was converted into the the Habsburg Empire was converted into the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. The new state wanted to establish secular connections with all churches, including secular connections were to be established with Jews as well. So the Austro-Hungarian monarchy actually asked Jewish communities to form a secular platform that the state can deal with. In 1868, this Congress was pulled together. But by that time, the question of assimilation and the depth of assimilation and integration was already quite problematic. This synagogue was built actually by the conservative neologues. Well, neologues might not ring a bell to you. Neologues are those, neologue is a Hungarian congregation. They are very conservative, like Orthodox, but they believed in assimilation and integration. The conservative wing of the neologues that built this synagogue could not stomach having a organ in the other synagogue that the neologues built. But the neologues understood that they don't agree. They agreed to disagree. So the neologue congregation decided to build two synagogues instead of one. One featuring an organ and the second one featuring no organs. Both of the synagogues show great influence from the Mediterranean, from the Near and Middle East, influence of the Byzantine Empire's architecture, influence of the Islamic art, and influence of the Moorish architecture. As you can see when I zoom in, then the horizontal lines are orange and yellow colored. There are also blue tiles, enhancing the Oriental look. The battlement that you can see now happens to be Byzantine, and the synagogue also features two minaret-shaped towers. So this is the synagogue that features no organs in the neighborhood. We'll talk about the ones that do feature. One very sad thing happened here, very tragic, not even sad, but rather tragic. And I'm sorry, but we have to avoid some locals as well on the streets. This is a live tour, so you never know how many pedestrians there are on the streets. So anyways, in 1941, it was this synagogue from where 18,000 people been taken to Kameniec-Podolsk, where most of them been executed by German and Hungarian forces. This was the first mass murder during the Second World War. Mostly those were transported from Budapest to Kameniec-Podolsk, which would now be on the Polish-Ukrainian border, could not prove their citizenship. The Hungarian-Polish, the Romanian-Hungarian border were open, and because the borders were open, those whose lives were threatened, they could flee to Hungary. This also includes Jews as well. And from Poland, about 60,000 civilians and 40,000 soldiers fled to Hungary, and from Romania as well, multiple 10,000 people fled to Hungary. To the country which already had anti-Semitic laws, which largely limited the fundamental rights of fundamental rights. English is a difficult language. As by the 1930s, but the lives of Jews were not threatened until 1941. And between 1941 and the 19th of March, 1944, no mass executions took place in Hungary. But Jewish men between the age of 18 and 50 been drafted in the army, and they were forced to do labor service for the army, forced labor service, which meant that they had to build the bunkers, the trenches, and so on and so forth. Depending on the superior officers of these troops, of these forced labor force troops, either people's life will miserable in the army, or the army could provide a much higher chance of survivor than labor camps or death camps could. It always depended on the superior officers' political views or humanitarian views, if you wish. Some of these officers been recognized by Yad Vashem and been awarded Writers Among the Nations title as well. So there is a quite big variety of how officers treated these members of these forced labor troops. In the meantime, we arrived to the memorial of Karl Lutz, and the Karl Lutz memorial is also the place where we like to highlight the fact that we in Hungary, we call everyone an angel who saved 1, 2, or multiple lives. So whoever saved 1, 2, or multiple worlds during the Holocaust, during the Shoah. This memorial, as you could see, it's in a quite neglected corner of the country. Hence, I quite like virtual tours, because then I'm the captain of your eyes, and I can direct your attention to the details of this memorial that most likely, as an in-person tour, you would simply walk by and would likely not appreciate. The memorial features 2 figures. One lying on the ground represents those who were in need of help, and the second figure, an angel flying above those who were in need of help, trying to assist them, trying to help them. This is also the place where we like to tell the story of Karl Lutz, who was the deputy ambassador of Switzerland to Hungary. And as Switzerland was representing all allied states, as a neutral state, Switzerland also represented Palestine in Hungary. Switzerland got the permission from Nazi Germany to transport 8,000 Jews from Hungary to Palestine. It was Karl Lutz's job to translate this permission from German to Hungarian. And he made a little mistake during the translation. He translated the permission as 8,000 family passes instead of 8,000 individual passes. And obviously the size of a family was not fixed by this permission. So this way, significantly more passes could be issued than the original permission stated. It is known that we believe that Karl Lutz saved something between 10 to 50,000 people with these permissions. In Hungary, we like to give nicknames to angels, to efficient angels. The nickname of Karl Lutz in Hungary is the officer, because he saved lives by sitting behind a desk and by issuing protective letters and passes. We also have a quote from Karl Lutz's diary here. I will read it first in Hungarian and then in English. It goes as beleörülök, amikor hirtelen döntenem kell, kit mentsek meg, hol van Isten. In English, it goes as I'm going crazy that I have to decide on a spot who to save and who not to. Where is God? We also have here quotes saying that whoever saves a life saves an entire world as well. So that would be the memorial for the angels and for Karl Lutz. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or feel free to put your questions in the comment section. Otherwise, we will continue on the super narrow Dob Street towards the second synagogue, towards the Orthodox synagogue, so that we can make our way back to the Dohányi Street synagogue in the next roughly half an hour. So as I've mentioned, Neolog and the Neolog congregation before, the concept of assimilation and integration was rather shown in the, external things. They decided to dress like the majority does. They decided to use the same language that the majority does. They actually invested a lot of time and effort and money into learning Hungarian. They had Sunday schools for adults, so they would learn the language of the majority. And their rabbis actually dressed like a Roman Catholic priest would dress. And besides the weekly portion, which obviously was read read in Hebrew. English seems to be a difficult language this afternoon. My apologies. It's not my native. The rest of the communal services was in Hungarian. The idea behind was that should a Christian bump into their synagogues, which from the outside looked very much like a Roman Catholic church or a cathedral, their first impression would be that Jews and Roman Catholics, they are like the same people. If their priests dress the same as their priest does, if they use the same language, if their place of worship looks similar than the Christians' place of worship, then those people who pray in those places of worship, they must be the same as well. That was the idea behind the neologue assimilation and integration, to create bridges between themselves and the Christians. In Budapest, the neologues were and they still are the most dominant